1. The period of the gods. In the beginning, we are told that in the very beginning, heaven and earth were not yet separated, and the yin and yo not yet divided. This reminds us of other cosmogony stories. The yin and yo, corresponding to the Chinese yang and yin, were the male and female principles. It was more convenient for the old Japanese writers to imagine the coming into being of creation in terms not very remote from their own manner of birth. In Polynesian mythology, we find pretty much the same conception, where Ringi and Papa represented heaven and earth, and further parallels may be found in Egyptian and other cosmogony stories. In nearly all we find the male and female principles taking a prominent, and after all very rational place. We are told in the Nihongi that these male and female principles formed a chaotic mass like an egg which was of obscurely defined limits and contained germs. Eventually this egg was quickened into life, and the purer and clearer part was drawn out and formed heaven, while the heavier element settled down and became earth, which was compared to the floating of a fish sporting on the surface of the water. A mysterious form resembling a reed shoot suddenly appeared between heaven and earth, and as suddenly became transformed into a god called Kuni Tokatachi, land eternal stand of August thing. We may pass over the other divine births until we come to the important deities known as Izanagi and Izanami, male who invites and female who invites. About these beings has been woven an entrancing myth. Izanagi and Izanami. Izanagi and Izanami stood on the floating bridge of heaven and looked down into the abyss. They inquired of each other if there were a country far, far below the great floating bridge. They were determined to find out. In order to do so, they thrust down a jewel spear and found the ocean. Raising the spear a little, water dripped from it, coagulated, and became the island of Onagorojima, spontaneously Congeal Island. Upon this island the two deities descended. Shortly afterwards they desired to become husband and wife, though as a matter of fact they were brother and sister. But such a relationship in the East has never precluded marriage. These deities accordingly set up a pillar on the island. Izanagi walked round one way, and Izanami the other. When they met, Izanami said, "How delightful! I have met with a lovely youth." One would have thought that this naive remark would have pleased Izanagi, but it made him extremely angry, and he retorted, "I am a man, and by that right should have spoken first. How is it that on the contrary thou, a woman, shouldst have been the first to speak? This is unlucky. Let us go round again." So it happened that the two deities started afresh. Once again they met, and this time Izanagi remarked, "How delightful! I have met a lovely maiden." Shortly after this very ingenuous proposal, Izanagi and Izanami were married. When Izanami had given birth to islands, seas, rivers, herbs, and trees, she and her lord consulted together, saying, "We have now produced the great eight-island country, with the mountains, rivers, herbs, and trees. Why should we not produce someone who shall be the lord of the universe?" The wish of these deities was fulfilled, for in due season Amaterasu, the sun goddess, was born. She was known as Heaven Illumine of Great Deity, and was so extremely beautiful that her parents determined to send her up the ladder of heaven, and in the high sky above to cast forever her glorious sunshine upon the earth. Their next child was the moon god Tsukiyumi. His silver radiance was not so fair as the golden effulgence of his sister, the sun goddess, but he was nevertheless deemed worthy to be her consort. So up the ladder of heaven climbed the moon god. They soon quarreled, and Amaterasu said, "Thou art a wicked deity. I must not see thee face to face." They were therefore separated by a day and night, and dwelt apart. The next child of Izanagi and Izanami was Susa-no-o, the impetuous male. We shall return to Susa-no-o and his doings later on, and content ourselves for the present with confining our attention to his parents. Izanami gave birth to the fire god Kagutsuchi. The birth of this child made her extremely ill. Izanagi knelt on the ground, bitterly weeping and lamenting. But his sorrow availed nothing, and Izanami crept away into the land of Yomi, Hades. Her lord, however, could not live without her, and he too went into the land of Yomi. When he discovered her, she said regretfully, "My lord and husband, why is thy coming so late? I have already eaten of the cooking furnace of Yomi. Nevertheless, I am about to lie down to rest. I pray thee do not look at me." Izanagi, moved by curiosity, refused to fulfill her wish. It was dark in the land of Yomi, so he secretly took out his many-toothed comb, broke off a piece, and lighted it. The sight that greeted him was ghastly and horrible in the extreme. His once beautiful wife had now become a swollen and festering creature. 8 varieties of thunder gods rested upon her. The thunder of the fire, earth, and mountain were all there leering upon him, and roaring with their great voices. Izanagi grew frightened and disgusted, saying, "I have come unawares to a hideous and polluted land." His wife retorted, "Why didst thou not observe that which I charged thee? Now am I put to shame." Izanami was so angry with her lord for ignoring her wish and breaking in upon her privacy that she sent the 8 ugly females of Yomi to pursue him. Izanagi drew his sword and fled down the dark regions of the underworld. As he ran, he took off his headdress and flung it to the ground. It immediately became a bunch of grapes. When the ugly females saw it, they bent down and ate the luscious fruit. Izanami saw them pause and deemed it wise to pursue her lord herself. By this time, Izanagi had reached the even pass of Yomi. Here he placed a huge rock and eventually came face to face with Izanami. One would scarcely have thought that amid such exciting adventures Izanagi would have solemnly declared a divorce. But this is just what he did do. To this proposal his wife replied, "My dear lord and husband, if thou sayest so, I will strangle to death the people in one day." This plaintive and threatening speech in no way influenced Izanagi, who readily replied that he would cause to be born in one day no less than 1,500. The above remark must have proved conclusive, for when we next hear of Izanagi, he had escaped from the land of Yomi, from an angry wife, and from the 8 ugly females. After his escape, he was engaged in copious ablutions by way of purification, from which numerous deities were born. We read in the Nihongi, after this Izanagi, his divine task having been accomplished, and his spirit career about to suffer a change, built himself an abode of gloom in the island of Ahaji, where he dwelt forever in silence and concealment. Amaterasu and Susanoo. Susanoo, or the impetuous male, was the brother of Amaterasu, the sun goddess. Now Susanoo was a very undesirable deity indeed, and he figured in the realm of the Japanese gods as a decidedly disturbing element. His character has been clearly drawn in the Nihongi, more clearly perhaps than that of any other deity mentioned in these ancient records. Susanoo had a very bad temper, which often resulted in many cruel and ungenerous acts. Moreover, in spite of his long beard, he had a habit of continually weeping and wailing. Where a child in a tantrum would crush a toy to pieces, the impetuous male, when in a towering rage, and without a moment's warning, would wither the once fair greenery of mountains, and in addition bring many people to an untimely end. His parents, Izanagi and Izanami, were much troubled by his doings, and after consulting together, they decided to banish their unruly son to the land of Yomi. Susa, however, had a word to say in the matter. He made the following petition, saying, "I will now obey thy instructions and proceed to the netherland, Yomi. Therefore I wish for a short time to go to the plane of high heaven and meet with my elder sister, Amaterasu. After which I will go away forever." This apparently harmless request was granted, and Susanoo ascended to heaven. His departure occasioned a great commotion of the sea, and the hills and mountains groaned aloud. Now Amaterasu heard these noises, and perceiving that they denoted the near approach of her wicked brother Susanoo, she said to herself, "Is my younger brother coming with good intentions? I think it must be his purpose to rob me of my kingdom. By the charge which our parents gave to their children, each of us has his own allotted limits. Why, therefore, does he reject the kingdom to which he should proceed, and make bold to come spying here?" Amaterasu then prepared for warfare. She tied her hair into knots and hung jewels upon it, and round her wrists an august string of 500 Yasaka jewels. She presented a very formidable appearance when in addition she slung over her back a 1,000-arrow quiver and a 500-arrow quiver, and protected her arms with pads to deaden the recoil of the bowstring. Having arrayed herself for deadly combat, she brandished her bow, grasped her sword hilt, and stamped on the ground till she had made a hole sufficiently large to serve as a fortification. All this elaborate and ingenious preparation was in vain. The impetuous male adopted the manner of a penitent. "From the beginning," he said, "my heart has not been black. But as, in obedience to the stern behest of our parents, I am about to depart forever to the Netherland, how could I bear to depart without having seen face to face thee, my elder sister? It is for this reason that I have traversed on foot the clouds and mists, and have come hither from afar. I am surprised that my elder sister should, on the contrary, put on so stern a countenance." Amaterasu regarded these remarks with a certain amount of suspicion. Susanoo's filial piety and Susanoo's cruelty were not easily to be reconciled. She thereupon resolved to test his sincerity by a remarkable proceeding we need not describe. Suffice it to say that for the time being the test proved the impetuous male's purity of heart and general sincerity towards his sister. But Susanoo-o's good behavior was a very short-lived affair indeed. It happened that Amaterasu had made a number of excellent rice fields in heaven. Some were narrow and some were long, and Amaterasu was justly proud of these rice fields. No sooner had she sown the seed in the spring than Susanoo broke down the divisions between the plots, and in the autumn let loose a number of piebald colts. One day when he saw his sister in the sacred weaving hall, weaving the garments of the gods, he made a hole through the roof and flung down a flayed horse. Amaterasu was so frightened that she accidentally wounded herself with the shuttle. Extremely angry, she determined to leave her abode. So, gathering her shining robes about her, she crept down the blue sky, entered a cave, fastened it securely, and there dwelt in seclusion. Now the world was in darkness, and the alternation of night and day was unknown. When this dreadful catastrophe had taken place, the 80 myriads of gods assembled together on the bank of the river of heaven and discussed how they might best persuade Amaterasu to grace heaven once more with her shining glory. No less a god than Thought Combining, after much profound reasoning, gathered together a number of singing birds from the eternal land. After sundry divinations with a deer's leg bone, over a fire of cherry bark, the gods made a number of tools, bellows, and forges. Stars were welded together to form a mirror, and jewelry and musical instruments were eventually fashioned. When all these things had been duly accomplished, the 80 myriads of gods came down to the rock cavern where the sun goddess lay concealed, and gave an elaborate entertainment. On the upper branches of the true Sakaki tree, they hung the precious jewels, and on the middle branches the mirror. From every side there was a great singing of birds, which was only the prelude to what followed. Now Yuzum, heavenly alarming female, took in her hand a spear wreathed with eulalia grass, and made a headdress of the true Sakaki tree. Then she placed a tub upside down, and proceeded to dance in a very immodest manner, till the 80 myriad gods began to roar with laughter. Such extraordinary proceedings naturally awakened the curiosity of Amaterasu, and she peeped forth. Once more the world became golden with her presence. Once more she dwelt in the plain of high heaven, and Susanoo was duly chastised and banished to the Yomi land. With the usual inconsistency of myths and legends, we are not surprised to find that all reference to Susa dwelling in the land of Yomi is entirely omitted. When we next see him, it is apart from his usual mischievous disposition. Indeed, we find him in a role worthy of one of the knights of the Round Table. Whether the sudden display of knight-errantry was a cunning move on his part for some ulterior motive, or whether his sister's sudden withdrawal from heaven had made him permanently reform his ways, we are left in entire ignorance. Susanoo, having descended from heaven, arrived at the river High, in the province of Izumo. Here he was disturbed by a sound of weeping. It was so unusual to hear any other than himself weep that he went in search of the cause of the sorrow. He discovered an old man and an old woman. Between them was a young girl, whom they fondly caressed and gazed at with pitiful eyes, as if they were reluctantly bidding her a last farewell. When Susanoo asked the old couple who they were, and why they lamented, the old man replied, "I am an earthly deity, and my name is Ashinedzuchi, Footstroke Elder. My wife's name is Tenedzuchi, Handstroke Elder. This girl is our daughter, and her name is Kushinadaheim, Wondrous Inada Princess. The reason of our weeping is that formerly we had 8 children, daughters, but they have been devoured year by year by an 8-forked serpent, and now the time approaches for this girl to be devoured. There is no means of escape for her, and therefore do we grieve exceedingly." The impetuous male listened to this painful recital with profound attention, and perceiving that the maiden was extremely beautiful, he offered to slay the 8-forked serpent if her parents would give her to him in marriage as a fitting reward for his services. This request was readily granted. Susanoo now changed Kushinadaheim into a many-toothed comb and stuck it in his hair. Then he bade the old couple brew a quantity of sake. When the sake was ready, he poured it into 8 tubs and awaited the coming of the dreadful monster. Eventually the serpent came. It had 8 heads, and the eyes were red, like winter cherry. Moreover, it had 8 tails, and firs and cypress trees grew on its back. It was in length the space of 8 hills and 8 valleys. Its lumbering progress was necessarily slow, but finding the sake, each head eagerly drank the tempting beverage till the serpent became extremely drunk and fell asleep. Then Susanoo, having little to fear, drew his 10-span sword and chopped the great monster into little pieces. When he struck one of the tails, his weapon became notched, and bending down he discovered a sword called the Murakumo no Tsurugi. Perceiving it to be a divine sword, he gave it to the gods of heaven. Having successfully accomplished his task, Susanoo converted the many-toothed comb into Kushinadaheim again, and at length came to Suga, in the province of Izumo, in order that he might celebrate his marriage. Here he composed the following verse. Many clouds arise, on all sides a manifold fence, to receive within it the spouses. They form a manifold fence. Ah, that manifold fence. Nihongi trans, by W. G. Aston. The Divine Messengers. Now at that time the gods assembled in the high plain of heaven were aware of continual disturbances in the central land of reed plains, Izumo. We are told that plains, the rocks, tree stems, and herbage have still the power of speech. At night they make a clamor like that of flames of fire. In the daytime they swarm up like flies in the 5th month. In addition, certain deities made themselves objectionable. The gods determined to put an end to these disturbances, and after a consultation Takumi Masubi decided to send his grandchild Ninigi to govern the central land of reed plains, to wipe out insurrection, and to bring peace and prosperity to the country. It was deemed necessary to send messengers to prepare the way in advance. The first envoy was Amano-ho, but as he spent 3 years in the country without reporting to the gods, his son was sent in his place. He adopted the same course as his father, and defied the orders of the heavenly ones. The third messenger was Amewaka, Heaven Young Prince. He too was disloyal, in spite of his noble weapons, and instead of going about his duties he fell in love and took to wife Shida-teruheim, Lower Shine Princess. Now the assembled gods grew angry at the long delay, and sent a pheasant down to ascertain what was going on in Izumo. The pheasant perched on the top of a cassia tree before Amewaka's gate. When Amewaka saw the bird, he immediately shot it. The arrow went through the bird, rose into the place of gods, and was hurled back again, so that it killed the disloyal and idle Amewaka. The weeping of Lower Shine Princess reached heaven, for she loved her lord and failed to recognize in his sudden death the just vengeance of the gods. She wept so loud and so pitifully that the heavenly ones heard her. A swift wind descended, and the body of Amewaka floated up into the high plain of heaven. A mortuary house was made, in which the deceased was laid. Mr. Frank Rinder writes, "For 8 days and 8 nights there was wailing and lamentation. The wild goose of the river, the heron, the kingfisher, the sparrow, and the pheasant mourned with a great mourning. Now it happened that a friend of Amewaka, Ajishirki by name, heard the sad dirges proceeding from heaven. He therefore offered his condolence. He so resembled the deceased that when Amewaka's parents, relations, wife, and children saw him, they exclaimed, 'Our lord is still alive.' This greatly angered Ajishirki, and he drew his sword and cut down the mortuary house, so that it fell to the earth and became the mountain of Moyama. We are told that the glory of Ajishirki was so effulgent that it illuminated the space of 2 hills and 2 valleys. Those assembled for the morning celebrations uttered the following song. Like the string of jewels, worn on the neck, of the weaving maiden, that dwells in heaven. Oh, the luster of the jewels, flung across 2 valleys, from Ajisuki Takahiko to the side pool of the rocky stream, whose narrows are crossed by the country wenches, afar from heaven. Come hither, the women are fair, and spread across thy net, in the side pool of the rocky stream, Nihongi trans, by W. G. Aston. 2 more gods were sent to the central land of reed plains, and these gods were successful in their mission. They returned to heaven with a favorable report, saying that all was now ready for the coming of the august grandchild. The coming of the august grandchild. Amaterasu presented her grandson Ninigi, or Prince Raisuruddy Plenty, with many gifts. She gave him precious stones from the mountain steps of heaven, white crystal balls, and most valuable gift of all, the divine sword that Susanoo had discovered in the Serpent. She also gave him the star mirror into which she had gazed when peeping out of her cave. Several deities accompanied Ninigi, including that lively maiden of mirth and dance Yuzum, whose dancing, it will be remembered, so amused the gods. Ninigi and his companions had hardly broken through the clouds and arrived at the 8-forked road of heaven, when they discovered, much to their alarm, a gigantic creature with large and brightly shining eyes. So formidable was his aspect that Ninigi and all his companions, except the merry and bewitching Yuzum, started to turn back with intent to abandon their mission. But Yuzum went up to the giant and demanded who it was that dared to impede their progress. The giant replied, "I am the deity of the field paths. I come to pay my homage to Ninigi, and beg to have the honor to be his guide. Return to your master, O fair Yuzum, and give him this message." So Yuzum returned and gave her message to the gods, who had so ignominiously retreated. When they heard the good news, they greatly rejoiced, burst once more through the clouds, rested on the floating bridge of heaven, and finally reached the summit of Takachii. The august grandchild, with the deity of the field paths for guide, traveled from end to end of the kingdom over which he was to rule. When he had reached a particularly charming spot, he built a palace. Ninigi was so pleased with the service the deity of the field paths had rendered him that he gave that giant, the merry Yuzum, to wife. Ninigi, after having romantically rewarded his faithful guide, began to feel the stirring of love himself, when one day, while walking along the shore, he saw an extremely lovely maiden. "Who are you, most beautiful lady?" inquired Ninigi. She replied, "I am the daughter of the great mountain possessor. My name is Konohana, the princess who makes the flowers of the trees to blossom." Ninigi fell in love with Konohana. He went with all haste to her father, Ohoyama, and begged that he would favor him with his daughter's hand. Ohoyama had an elder daughter, Aichi-naga, princess long as the rocks. As her name implies, she was not at all beautiful, but her father desired that Ninigi's children should have life as eternal as the life of rocks. He therefore presented both his daughters to Ninigi, expressing the hope that the suitor's choice would fall upon Aichi-naga. Just as Cinderella, and not her ugly sisters, is dear to children of our own country, so did Ninigi remain true to his choice, and would not even look upon Aichi-naga. This neglect made Princess Long as the Rocks extremely angry. She cried out, with more vehemence than modesty, "Had you chosen me, you and your children would have lived long in the land. Now that you have chosen my sister, you and yours will perish as quickly as the blossom of trees, as quickly as the bloom on my sister's cheek." However, Ninigi and Konohana lived happily together for some time, but one day jealousy came to Ninigi and robbed him of his peace of mind. He had no cause to be jealous, and Konohana much resented his treatment. She retired to a little wooden hut and set it on fire. From the flames came 3 baby boys. We need only concern ourselves with 2 of them, Hoderi, Fireshine, and Hoori, Firefade. Hoori, as we shall see later on, was the grandfather of the first Mikado of Japan. In the palace of the sea god, Hoderi was a great fisherman, while his younger brother, Hoori, was an accomplished hunter. One day they exclaimed, "Let us for a trial exchange gifts." This they did, but the elder brother, who could catch fish to some purpose, came home without any spoil when he went a-hunting. He therefore returned the bow and arrows, and asked his younger brother for the fishhook. Now it so happened that Hoori had lost his brother's fishhook. The generous offer of a new hook to take the place of the old one was scornfully refused. He also refused to accept a heaped-up tray of fishhooks. To this offer the elder brother replied, "These are not my old fishhook. Though they are many, I will not take them." Now Hoori was sore troubled by his brother's harshness, so he went down to the seashore and there gave way to his grief. A kind old man by the name of Shikotsutsu no Aji, Salt's the elder, said, "Why dost thou grieve here?" When the sad tale was told, the old man replied, "Grieve no more. I will arrange this matter for thee." True to his word, the old man made a basket, set Hoori in it, and then sank it in the sea. After descending deep down in the water, Hoori came to a pleasant strand rich with all manner of fantastic seaweed. Here he abandoned the basket and eventually arrived at the palace of the sea god. Now this palace was extremely imposing. It had battlements and turrets and stately towers. A well stood at the gate, and over the well there was a cassia tree. Here Hoori loitered in the pleasant shade. He had not stood there long before a beautiful woman appeared. As she was about to draw water, she raised her eyes, saw the stranger, and immediately returned, with much alarm, to tell her mother and father what she had seen. The god of the sea, when he had heard the news, prepared an 8-fold cushion and led the stranger in, asking his visitor why he had been honored by his presence. When Hoori explained the sad loss of his brother's fishhook, the sea god assembled all the fishes of his kingdom, broad of fin and narrow of fin. And when the thousands upon thousands of fishes were assembled, the sea god asked them if they knew anything about the missing fishhook. "We know not," answered the fishes. "Only the red woman, the Tai, has had a sore mouth for some time past, and has not come." She was accordingly summoned, and on her mouth being opened the lost fishhook was discovered. Hoori then took to wife the sea god's daughter, Toyotama, Rich Jewel, and they dwelt together in the palace under the sea. For 3 years all went well, but after a time Hoori hungered for a sight of his own country, and possibly he may have remembered that he had yet to restore the fishhook to his elder brother. These not unnatural feelings troubled the heart of the loving Toyotama, and she went to her father and told him of her sorrow. But the sea god, who was always urbane and courteous, in no way resented his son-in-law's behavior. On the contrary, he gave him the fishhook, saying, "When thou givest this fishhook to thy elder brother, before giving it to him, call to it secretly, and say, 'A poor hook.'" He also presented Hoori with the jewel of the flowing tide and the jewel of the ebbing tide, saying, "If thou dost dip the tide-flowing jewel, the tide will suddenly flow, and therewithal thou shalt drown thine elder brother. But in case thy elder brother should repent and beg forgiveness, if, on the contrary, thou dip the tide-ebbing jewel, the tide will spontaneously ebb, and therewithal thou shalt save him. If thou harass him in this way, thy elder brother will of his own accord render submission." Just before Hoori was about to depart, his wife came to him and told him that she was soon to give him a child. Said she, "On a day when the winds and waves are raging, I will surely come forth to the seashore. Build for me a house, and await me there." Hoderi and Hoori reconciled. When Hoori reached his own home, he found his elder brother, who admitted his offense and begged for forgiveness, which was readily granted. Toyotama and her younger sister bravely confronted the winds and waves and came to the seashore. There Hoori had built a hut roofed with cormorant feathers, and there in due season she gave birth to a son. When Toyotama had blessed her lord with offspring, she turned into a dragon and slipped back into the sea. Hoori's son married his aunt, and was the father of 4 children, one of whom was Kamiyamato Baiko, who is said to have been the first human emperor of Japan, and is now known as Jimmu Tenno. Click on the promotional links on the descriptions for great offers only for you.